Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales. This could be due to a lack in confidence, comfort, just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help folks like you improve at sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking. This is Mike Simmons. I am the founder of Catalyst Sale and CRO of SibeSafe. Today, we have Chris Walker, CEO and founder of Refine Labs on the podcast. This is the second time Chris has joined us. Let's get into the conversation. Chris, we're back.
We're back.
It's been a while, and I thought it'd be awesome to get into a discussion around demand gen at an enterprise SaaS level and just kind of take it through. What's the best way for us to do this?
So I think let's just fire them off. Let's just get into it for everyone. We've been through episode 1. So if you haven't, feel free to reference episode 1 for a more like high level. And now let's get into like tactical details. So whatever you think would be most helpful to go through, I'm ready to do it.
Yeah. So let's say someone comes to you, or let's say I come to you. I'm building demand gen team inside an enterprise SaaS group. And I say, hey, I need to spin up demand quickly and see an impact. What are some things that I can start to put into place if I want to double, maybe triple revenue over the course of the next 12 to 18 months? And let's assume that I've already got a sales team in place and there's already some pipeline that has been created, and a lot of that's going to be managed as it goes through or will advance. But let's talk about how do we do the things now, knowing that we're going to be in business in the next 6 to 12 months and expecting we want to grow. How do we what kind of things do we put in place now to help improve the likelihood that those things will land around the time that we need them to?
Yeah. So the first thing on this for the listeners is I just want to clarify, because enterprise means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so for the sake of this conversation, let's just consider enterprise a sales-led motion with an ACV that is greater than 30K and can move all the way up, right? And so at a greater than 30K, you're going to have, for most companies, you're going to have a rep that's actually closing that deal from a demand lead. And then at the enterprise level, you're going to go more at the quote unquote enterprise. At the like very large company stage, you're going to go into a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-few model. And at the lower end of the ACVs, you're going to do a 1-to-many model.
100%.
Now we have that.
100%. And just let's add even just more clarity. Let's say that there's segmentation in the market where we look at things that are going to be over 100K, so over 6-figure in ACV, and those that are under 50K in ACV. And we know there's going to be some kind of overlap and kind of melding between the two. So even though those aren't hard, I get it, the math, there's a gap between 50K and 100K. There's going to be some overlap that takes there. So maybe we look at things in the context of things that are over opportunities that are over 100K and opportunities that are under 50K. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because the deal sizes at like first glance are not that much different, but this actually requires quite a dramatically different go-to-market. Yes, your demand targeting and your whatever people want to call it, air cover marketing, demand gen, any of those different things are going to overlap between these two segments, but the overall go-to-market is going to be different between the two. Yeah, so when I look at 2x revenue, I'm going through this with companies right now over whatever period of time. I think the easiest thing to start with is just to do the math. And so when you do the math, you break it up to like, how much is our partner network going to grow? How much did they do last year? Is that realistic? What is the sales cycle time lag? Things like that. On the sales side, you can do the exact same thing. Make sure it's realistic though, because a lot of companies just add headcount and back calculate. And obviously that doesn't work for the most part. And then I think the most important question here is on the demand side of marketing, because perhaps if the company hasn't stood this up before, you don't have historical data, not enough to make any real projections off of. And so building that model, I think, is a really interesting one to know what is the level of contribution from each of these and where is the most important segment and where is the risk.
What are some of the questions that we should be looking at relative to the historic data? So when you say historic data, are we looking at general attribution type stuff? Are we looking at roles of people that come in? Are we looking at some conversion type information? Like as we get into the kind of the detail, what kind of historic data are we trying to capture?
Yeah, I mean, in its most simple form, you want to have a sense of, out of those 3 big top level buckets, what is the contribution of those 3 buckets to qualified pipeline? I want to define qualified pipeline. I've been doing this more often because I think I've seen a ton of different definitions of what qualified pipeline means. And so to me, qualified pipeline means they've gone through a discovery with an AE, not an SDR. The AE has provided some level of a demo, most likely has provided pricing. There's an amount attached to the deal, and it's still open inside of Salesforce. And you're going to win those opportunities at greater than 20% minimum, right? And so that's what I consider qualified. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have people that, oh, the SDR booked a meeting, hasn't even sat with an AE, and that's qualified. There's a huge distinction about how many people are going to get lost from one step to the other. And so I like to consider qualified late stage, very predictable win rates beyond that.
Awesome.
So you want to look at what is the contribution of qualified pipeline based on that definition across those three sources, and what is the contribution of revenue? I mean, you want to look at the overall funnel of those. You might not have it for partner, at least not a huge visibility to it, but you should have it in both sales and marketing, and just look at those funnel metrics. And that gives you a baseline of where you are and what's happening. So some examples of some things that I would walk into and see, it's like marketing only generated 5% of revenue last year, and only whatever that number could be, like 5% of pipeline too. That means that there's a huge opportunity, right? Especially in the one-to-many type of segment.
Yeah.
And so kind of looking at part of its experience, like I'm sure if you ask pointed questions, we can get through some of the nuances that happen in my head as I go through that. But those are some of the initial things that I would look at.
Yeah. So one of the things we can do, most organizations struggle with this, and fortunate that we can go through and do this, but you can look back and see, where did the business actually come from? What was the original source of these deals? How did they come together? And like most early stage organizations, many times those fall into a couple of categories. There's partners who deliver them, so some kind of a referral kind of activity. There are those that raise their hand because of events that we participated in. They see somebody speak at an event. They see some kind of engagement that we're in a community, or they come from within our network. And within our network could be existing customers providing referrals. That's kind of how we bucket those. Are there others that we should be thinking about? Like, are there others? Could we be missing something there?
Yeah. I mean, in the referral side, customers that are telling people, one of your top investors recommended to another company in their portfolio, which I see a lot, especially pre-Series A. Like that's how a lot of companies get to an A round, which is funny. Overall, just like founder networks, I think those are some of the three. And when I look at referrals, and the one that I didn't hear you say was, we went out and sourced this deal ourselves, right? We have hand raisers, we have partners, but it's also, sure, this is happening. Like people are going out and trying to source deals on their own. I think those are like probably the four categories.
Definitely. Is there do people fall into the trap of trying to create a rule of thumb around how that segmentation should happen? And is there a right answer, or is there just ultimately the answer that exists within the organization? What's your view on that?
I think having a broad view of what's happening at different companies allows you to get closer to what the answer should be for you, but doesn't necessarily mean that is the answer for you, right? So based on how you define qualified, your win rates of qualified ops could be 5% or 40%, right? And so it also comes down to how you define and track and measure things. As I get more and more into these different companies in pipeline, their deal stages are different. What they consider qualified is different. How they process them is different. When they create an opportunity is different. When they put an amount in is different. How they do a demo, all those different things are variables that are different, as well as your buyers are different. Your product is different. The cost of it is different. And so there's just too much variability in what's happening to say our win rate should be 25%.
Yep.
Right. But a couple of the things that I point out based on your question is like, I would expect a partner network to be doing somewhere between 15 and 30% of revenue. Otherwise, if it's doing 3% and it doesn't have a shot of getting any bigger, it's, in my view, potentially not worth the overhead. And so I'm looking for partners, like a lot of the companies we see are in that 20 to 30% of revenue range coming through partners.
Yeah.
And then the sales and marketing one can be very different depending on go-to-market motions, cost of the product, marketing maturity inside of the company, and just their overall mindset on that.
What do you think about when you think about on the marketing maturity and market maturity side of things, as well as just general noise in the market? How do you look at let's say someone comes to you and says, I'm operating in a space, an environment, let's say it's emerging technology that gets a lot of attention, where there are a lot of people vying for the time of the decision maker, of the person who ultimately holds the budget to make the decision. So they've got a number of things that they need to do. They need to keep the lights on inside the organization and do their daily work, but they also need to be aware of and start to invest for the future. I mean, let's just take an emerging space. Let's say cybersecurity as an example. So in the security market, we have a lot of vendors that are out there vying for opportunity, trying to get a hold of the chief information security officer, the CISO.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of noise. How do you, when you think of it from a marketing perspective, a demand gen perspective, when you think of it from a demand gen perspective, how do you think about attacking a market like that where there's so much noise in the market?
Yeah. So when we think about emerging technology, what I'm looking for in that is there a lot of demand for the product or the category already? I think that is the number one variable that would dictate how I approach things from there. Right. And so like I've worked at medical device companies that were introducing a disruptive technology that had new clinical data that physicians didn't understand. Your marketing methodology to go and communicate that message is very different than if every physician's looking for something like what you do and they just have to decide between the 4 brands in the category, right? A lot of things would then come together to end up being the leading brand, but there's a lot of things that are different. And so which situation do you think it is for this one? Is there a lot of people already looking for it or not?
Good question. I think it depends on maturity. So there are organizations who have a higher level of maturity and they move from, we just need to do something to, we need to do something that's a bit more progressive and a bit more innovative. And I think that's a key distinction. Are we talking about people who are just kind of checking a box to say that they've invested in a solution to address a challenge that's in the market so that if anybody says, but are you doing the right things? They can say, yep, we've invested here and they've checked that box, versus those who are saying, I think I want to be a bit more innovative in this space. I want to do something different. Now, those people who are doing something different, some of them may know today that they want to do something different. Some of them may not have made that commitment. They may not even be aware that there's something different out there. So kind of splits into 3 categories. Those who are just ready to address a challenge. And then of those who are ready to address the challenge, those who want to innovate, and those who might be ready to innovate if they were aware of the innovation that's out there.
Yeah. And so it sounds like we have some amount of early adopters, but for the most part, I would say that the mass market, it's not like a CRM, like not, you know what I mean? What you're selling is different than the maturity level of the CRM category.
Correct.
Right. And so when you think about that, the first thing from a demand perspective, and I want to make a very clear distinction about like, this does not include outbound sales. And so from like a true using marketing channels to educate and generate product consideration or category consideration for your ICP. And if we're doing that, then we need to focus on going out and getting people because they're not coming and looking for us, at least without being prompted or somehow otherwise driven to do that. Right. And so when we think about how to go out and get them, the first thing is on the mindset side. And so when people are not looking for us, we need to get out of sales. We need to get out of lead gen mode, and we need to get into this person has no idea what we're doing or why. And we need to be able to show them and communicate to them effectively about this thing that we have, or this category, or this, market trend. They need to understand more about what it is, which then gets them ready to consider us both as a product level and a brand level. I see one huge mistake across a lot of different cybersecurity companies and also in other industries, but cybersecurity for sure, is only going after CISOs, not after the entire, IT security type of infrastructure. There's a lot of people underneath that person that can then go and bring that to their attention and drive a purchasing decision better than trying to force the CISO into a meeting with your ebook download.
Yeah,
it's just the truth. And so I see a big opportunity to move down in terms of the targeting, especially in a one-to-many model. And when you go down, you don't just own this little brand space for the CISO, if you were even able to get that. You own it at the market level. You own it at the job function level. Like that's where, especially in like large TAM and enterprise SaaS at 30K ACV, generally a big total addressable market, right? Like pretty much any company has some type of security thing that once they get over a certain size that they need to address.
Yep. Yeah.
And so how do you own a space in the mind of all of those people? That's what I've always been focused on. And so like, respiratory therapists, I wanted to own that space, right? And now, finance department is one that we have really figured out from multiple companies with generated success. Like we know how to get into that. And now we're working on sales, selling into the overall sales department, selling, branding, which creates sales into the sales department, and marketing as well. And we'll continue to different buyer personas as we go, because the way that these people buy things is not different. It's just what they're buying and who's selling it in the general process. But how people buy things is a global thing.
Yeah, I think so. Just as you're going through this, a couple of things that come to mind for me. One, there's this idea of what can you do that can trigger curiosity and interest and engagement, which I know are three kind of separate things, but this curiosity, this question of, hey, that's interesting. I want to know more. Interest, I want to know more. Engagement, I actually go and start doing things across aspects of the market who provide a level of influence. They may not actually be making a purchase decision, but they provide influence in the decision-making process. Is that fair understanding?
There's a ton of people that can influence a buying decision, right? For certain things, like the person doesn't even have to work at the company. It could be the person's wife, right? Like it could be the person's husband. It could be a lot of different things. Like there's places in B2C where like the 13-year-old daughter drives the 40-year-old mother to buy, to go to Equinox over a different gym or whatever those things are, right? And so there's a lot of different routes to influence that I think B2B is very far lower on the maturity curve. The reason that they're lower on the maturity curve is because they're so focused on lead gen, performance marketing, that when they collect that manager level person and that manager level person sits on that meeting because they're trying to sell to a person that is not the right person, that's why they don't do it. But if you marketed to that person and you taught them something and then allowed them to believe in it and then provide you access to the person that you want to meet with, instead of trying to force that person into a meeting when they don't want to and their business isn't self-qualified, I think that is the disconnect into why B2B companies don't do it.
Why do we make this mistake though? Like, why is it that, and I know you talked about the difference between lead gen.
This is very simple. It's because B2B companies are sales companies, not marketing companies. And so what's happened is that B2B companies historically were sales companies. It was the best way to go to market in the early 2000s, probably in the late 2000s as well. They were sales companies. And so what happened is as MarTech and marketing importance started to grow, companies started to reinvest it, but they thought about everything in a sales lens. And so when you have a marketing function and you think about it like a sales lens, it becomes how do I make this function work just like my SDRs, which is high volume, high activity, super low efficiency. That's what's happened inside of companies and tangible metrics. I got this many leads. It costs this much thing, like CFO spreadsheet stuff that doesn't actually map long-term because you have this wall between marketing and sales and you have this wall between SDRs and AEs. And that's why, you see the disconnect from the people that work the top of the funnel to the people that work at the bottom of the funnel, which is, I think why predictable revenue is declining in a lot of organizations because it actually drives a lot of the wrong things. So that's what I see.
Cool.
And that's really the reason why.
Yeah. So let's talk. The
mindset of just want to get this in here. It's the mindset of the executives at the highest level that drive everything down.
Yeah. So, and it seems like it's this, not only the mindset of focused on whatever that number is or that thing is that they think is really important, but it's also struggling with the idea of short-term versus long-term. Like when you describe, hey, we're going to try to get a market to grow and we're going to do some things that aren't necessarily going to be with our decision maker. I think the knee-jerk response is that's going to slow down my process rather than say with some work up front, it will accelerate things downstream. How did those conversations, or one, is it true that that's how people are looking at it and why the exec struggles with it? Or is there something else that factors in there?
Yeah. So when you look at specifically marketing in a short-term lens, what that actually translates to in real life is creating top of funnel metrics that don't actually materialize, that make you feel like you're moving forward. That's what it is. And so if you want to create short-term metrics, I would recommend that you just use your outbound team. Just do sales, like get them Zoom info and go ahead and do it, right? Because I go into enough companies, it's probably in the hundreds now of when I've been inside of their sales force and seen this exact same thing, which is short-term lead gen to high volume of leads, very low volume of opportunities because they all get filtered out during that process because they don't actually want to buy anything, which leads to a very, very, very high cost per qualified opportunity and a lot of wasted effort at the sales dev level. And so that's sort of what I see. And then if you can shift your mind around what you're trying to do when you think long-term is I just am not going to try and convert this person right this second. knowing that if I try to, I'm just going to put them into a meeting that they're not ready for, or that they don't show up to, or that they never answer our calls or never answer our emails. So why would I do that? If you can admit to yourself that what's happening right now isn't working, then it's very easy to shift your mindset to long term.
So my favorite quote around this, and I'll butcher it, and so it's funny to say it's my favorite one, but then I'll butcher it, is that whole idea. It's the question about when is the best time to plant a tree? It's 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Today. When we go through this process of saying, okay, I may not have the luxury of planting the seed 20 years ago. I need to start planting those seeds today. How do I know where, when, and what to start planting so that I can start testing to say, yes, this is actually working. And I start to see some of those indicators that I know aren't going to turn into money in the short term, but should turn into positive things long term. How should I start thinking about that?
The first tree to plant is a ridiculously intimate understanding of your customers.
Yep.
Like that is that, and very few SaaS companies plant that tree on a marketing team level. Very few, which is why their marketing falls short a lot of the times, especially on content creation. And so customer understanding in the marketing team across a lot of different seniority levels is really important, because the other thing that you see is you see one person go and do market research, build a persona, and then think that everyone else is going to understand people the same level as you off of that persona that says a lot of generic information that doesn't actually help people make decisions. And so this is across the entire team. If you want to have a team that's operating well, they all have to have a level of understanding about your buyers and a real understanding. I think the distinction is the difference between what you think. And I've been in this. I'm not like saying that other people aren't doing it. I've been in my shoes myself. Like I've thought that I pretended that I understood customers. And then I went to a different market or a different company and I really understood them. And I'm like, wow, that's really night and day. And so I think that's step one. Step two sort of is driven through how you break out your model, right? And so I would say at a lot of companies, the model gets segmented to marketing has to make up whatever sales can't, whatever sales isn't going to be able to do. And then as the growth continues, who's the main person on the hook or the main department on the hook for the continued growth is often marketing. At least that's what I'm seeing in 2021 planning. And so you, based on your model, you can start to figure out what are we going to need to actually get done. I think like find someone that knows what the right conversion metrics should look like, because there's a lot of garbage on the internet about, I posted today about 1% of leads become customers, and that has become like the gold standard demand waterfall model, which makes absolutely no sense. And so figure out what your like logical benchmark conversion rates you should be aiming for, compare that to historicals. Hopefully a few people have been on your website and asked for a demo, and then you can compare that to what is the gap between what I'm seeing right now versus what other people are seeing. Are they close? And if they're close, then you know, okay, this system is relatively stable. How do I put more in the top to move through that process? How do I do it in the right way so the conversion rates are the same? How many people do I need to have go through that? Is that number realistic? Am I willing to spend the amount required in order to get that done? So the economics work.
Yeah, these all seem to be, and don't take this the wrong way, as I put a qualifier out there, they seem to be like basic questions that, and like when I think about it on the sales side, many of the sales questions are basic questions, yet we want to find some clever trick that's going to help accelerate things. Is that part of the noise that happens in this space? Like, is it that we just struggle with doing the basic stuff really well because it maybe isn't as sexy as the new thing?
Shit is really basic. Understand your customers deeply and communicate effectively with them in a way that creates affinity for what the product category or brand that you represent. That's it. We don't need ABM tech. We don't need a CDP. We don't need those things in order to get the basics done. The problem is that we skip all the basics, think the technology is going to solve all the problems when it doesn't. I want to talk through an example of what I see a lot in this situation.
Can I ask a quick question?
I just want to make sure I don't lose this. So yeah, go ahead. I'll circle it. Go.
What's a CDP?
Customer data platform.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Yep.
Good clarifying. So a thing that I'm seeing across a lot of companies that fit into this space, enterprise SaaS, want to sell mid-market deals too, but recognize that their enterprise deals are much larger. And so they start drinking the ABM Kool-Aid. And so when they start drinking the ABM Kool-Aid, they start targeting only highest seniority at a certain level of accounts that are so far away from going to become a customer tomorrow. They don't do any one-to-many, or if they do one-to-many, it's driven in the wrong type of channels like display. They create no demand in the mid-market segment, and they're stuck doing mainly one-to-one outbound sales to their top enterprise accounts. And so that creates a huge mess. Like I said, this is what I was saying at the beginning. You need two separate go-to-market motions for these two things. Unless you are selling to the top 50, CPG brands in America, if you have a mid-market, large TAM segment, which a lot of companies do, whether or not they choose to recognize that you need to have a one-to-many demand model that is not based on engagement to outbound sales. You need to have a real marketing model, and you decide where you draw the line. And then at the ABM level, let's say 5,000, 10,000 employee plus, you decide you're going to need a one-to-one outbound motion, whether it's based on engagement, cold, or otherwise. Having smart reps create content, I think, is a create content for LinkedIn, depending on your buyer, is a massive gateway to 10,000 plus relationships and 10,000 plus accounts that become customers. That very few people do because the metrics don't allow. Whether they don't allow or they don't incentivize to, a lot of people aren't doing that type of tactic. Again, driven through the short-term lens of, why didn't you get 3 meetings this month? Or let me rephrase that. It's not even 3 meetings this month. Why didn't you make 100 calls a day last week, which would have, based on our model, gotten you 2 to 3 meetings? What you did is you made 5 calls and then you posted content on LinkedIn and got 1 meeting. And what people don't realize is that if you let that go for 6 months, you end up getting 25 meetings a week. And people are too short-sighted to ever see that. If anyone's listening, you would definitely realize the thing that I'm about to say. If I was my one-person consulting thing 2 years ago and I hired a team of 5 outbound SDRs, would my business be as big as it is right now? It might have gotten one more customer faster. That customer would have most likely been the wrong fit and churned faster. And there's no way that we would be bringing on the amount of customers that we are today, because the focus is long-term and the execution is brand, not sales. And so it's just something I'm trying to really hammer home for people is, if you want to do sales with your sales team. If you want to do marketing, actually do marketing. And ideally do both. Like, yeah, it's both. Well, it's the crossover. It's the idea that, and I truly believe that the introduction of a CRO owning marketing is a knee-jerk reaction fix is the wrong solution to the problem that everyone recognizes, which is marketing isn't delivering.
Why is it the wrong solution to the fix, or why is it the wrong way to start trying to fix the problem? Whether it ends up being the long-term solution or not, why is it the wrong way to start looking at the problem?
So there's a couple. One, the failure of marketing comes in 2 buckets only. Bucket 1, the CMO doesn't know what the fuck they're doing.
Right.
And cannot actually get results. And that's a very large bucket. There's that one. The other one that I think is interesting is that the metrics created at the higher level than the CMO force the CMO to operate in a certain way with their team that drives a high volume of leads and no actual business outcomes. And so you either have a CMO that can't execute, or you force a CMO to fail. And very rarely do you have a setup where the company actually sets the CMO up to succeed. And so that is the situation. Hey, CMO, we know we're going to only win 0.5% of our leads this year. We need 100,000 of them. Go out and get them. The only way to get 100,000 leads is to do all the wrong short-term behaviors and pass them to your SDRs and not have them close, right? So if you get forced into that thing, it's not the CMO's fault. It's the organization's fault for building a model like that in that way, to think that marketing works that way. And so if that's the situation, and I see that situation a lot, and it's sometimes because the organization drives it down, and oftentimes it's because the CMO doesn't know any better, which kind of puts them in bucket 1. Now, in bucket 1, the CMO can't get stuff done. You got 2 options. You could roll that up into a CRO, or you can go find a new CMO. I believe that finding a new CMO is the right solution. The reason being is that, if I just call it objectively, a lot of CROs know how important marketing is, but don't know how to actually execute marketing. And so you become vulnerable to the VP that you hire, and you also have the person at the top that's driving budget, process, metrics, all these different things, that doesn't actually know the inner workings of what's required to make that system work. And so what oftentimes I see is you end up with a CRO that owns marketing, and the marketing team actually gets driven to do a lot of the things that we talked about that don't work at the beginning, which is basically making your marketing team another form of an SDR team, which is not the right way to do marketing. So that's kind of the path of things that I'm seeing here. So I think it's a quick fix. It makes it seem right? Like, we'll get more alignment when it's under one leader. And then what we'll do is we'll have marketing start moving more towards sales metrics, and we'll get more sales metrics, but then you actually neglect doing any actual marketing.
what's awesome about it is it ties back into that discussion that we were having a little bit earlier when you asked me about segmenting the market. And it's, hey, one, is the problem known or unknown? If the problem, and let's just say, are people doing things about it today? Is it important enough for people to do things about it? And we talked about a level of maturity. There are some people who just want to tick the box. And it sounds like some people will aspire to make that unicorn hire in a CMO or a VP of marketing or head of growth or whatever the role is, and expect them to be a unicorn that makes an impact in a 90-day period. So automatically they're feeling the pressure of, I've got to come in, I've got to deliver, and I've got to start doing things that make an impact, because we all want to do our job and we all want to make an impact in the organization, but it can drive a level of inappropriate behavior doing things because you start focusing on numbers that you can change just by switching things. Yeah. Flipping a dial.
I could go into any one of the 25 SaaS companies that we work for right now and pump their lead volume numbers up by a ton of things without actually changing anything about the budget or anything. Just change the targeting and the objective. And I can light up their dashboards all day, which makes them feel good today. And in 3 months, it's not, which is what a lot of people do. A lot of people that are in my seat do that for their agency people, do that for their customers. A lot of internal people do that for their marketing team. And a lot of CMOs do that, whether or not they recognize what they're doing.
It's like me when I struggle with putting. I think all I need to do is just get a new putter, and it's not the putter.
When we think about like if you think about an overall strategy in terms of this, I break it down into a couple different buckets.
Awesome.
So the first one I think is called, if you exclude, like, we have attribution set up, we have a CRM, we have a deal process that works. Like, if you get rid of, our website can convert people and we can convert them into customers. Let's forget all of that entry level things. Step one is capture existing demand. So if people are looking for you, where are they looking? And so how do they, when they are looking, do they find you? Do they find you first? Those are the things that I'm focused on. So paid search, SEO can definitely work for this one. G2 Capterra software advice type of deals, lead aggregators or review sites, I think, are important. Conversion rate optimization on your website. How do you get someone there? They know what to do and they convert at the highest rate. While also, when you go through conversion rate optimization, not just converting more leads that don't become customers. So making sure that when you go through that process, your funnel metrics downstream stay the same. And then lastly, lead handoff optimization. What do you need to do in order to follow up with that person in the way that they want with the right person? And I think those are kind of like 5 buckets of capture existing demand. Now, when we look at the next step, which is create new demand, when I think about create new demand, I think about targeted paid that drives product consideration and problem awareness. So if the problem is unknown, you need to teach them about the problem. If they're not aware of the product, you need to get them aware of the product in a ton of different angles. This feature, this value prop, this thing, this integration, those different things. Wash, rinse, repeat over and over, continuously get better at figuring out how to do that. The reason that we're using targeted paid and we use it with a long-term mindset is because it's going to get you the fastest results. You're guaranteeing delivery of the information to people in places where they already spend their time. And then it all ultimately comes down to, can you communicate it to them effectively? We turn on ads for some companies and drive 10x demo volume over a very short period of time for companies that don't have a lot of volume initially. By doing it that way, not by asking them to give us their email address on a lead ad, right? And so by just giving them the information, letting them go through and then to come back to the website and convert. So you can do that in a lot of different places. YouTube, basically paid social is where I stay on that one, and paid social, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, I think are the majors. You want to have that thing moving. And then the last step, and ideally kind of like these steps are all being completed at once, but feel free to break them down as you need to in your organization. And the last one is really focused on organic brand, like true brand marketing, which is, I believe, leaning on a podcast. And the podcast is a video podcast, ideally, that gets driven down through distribution on YouTube, LinkedIn, and other platforms, become the organic version of what you're doing, which is more a category you have no intent to sell. And then you kind of have all those 3 going. When people are looking for you, they find you and they go through and they talk to your sales reps. People that don't know about you, which by the way is a huge proportion of the market. I would estimate probably more than 99%. For those people, you're consistently month over month, educating them on your product, the problems that you solve, the integrations that you have, all those different things. And then you have a podcast channel where people find you and become aware of your brand because the information was so good.
What about this scenario where, and I'm going to go through earlier on in this list of categories. So in the kind of the capture demand paid search component, let's say you start to see that high uptake in those organizations who engage directly, do some of the right things, and they want to move to demo, but you miss on your ICP or your buyer persona. So you failed on those things aren't necessarily converting into qualified opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So now the question for me comes up, are we actually talking to the right people? Do we really understand the market properly?
Totally.
What happens? How do you look at that? And what do you start to think about in that case? You did all the work. You felt like you were pretty clear on your ICP. And then you turn this thing on and all of a sudden you're getting the wrong people.
Yep. This is a huge challenge for companies that are Series A or before, that just raised a lot of money, have 600K ARR in revenue, have a lot of money to spend, expect their dashboards to get lit up on day one, and they do not have validated positioning, targeting, ability to close deals consistently, and how the product is messaged, they do not have a repeatable demand system yet, right? And so a lot of people will go through and be like, hey, we've run demand gen for 3 months. We're not seeing results. It must be the person who's running demand gen. Way easier to do that than to actually look deeply about whether or not you really understand your customers. And for companies of that size, they built the technology and they're trying to force it into whatever segment was the path of least resistance. And so oftentimes they really don't have an idea. And so I think that is a very large problem. The answer to that, there's, I guess, two answers. In a more traditional model, you figure out the value proposition before you build the product. You figure out who you're going to sell it to before you build it, right? Like that's what a lot of, especially companies that are growing and innovating on products as they go, that's sort of what they do, but you don't do that at the startup level. And understandably so, I get it, right? So you develop the product, or you identify your targets and you have validated value propositions in advance of building the product. Or if it's not working, you actually go and spend a lot of time with your customers. I've had this happen before at a Series A company that thought that it was a demand issue, right? I've been the person that's been running this in-house and had this happen. And the reason that it didn't work is because we were not targeting the right segment. And because we weren't targeting the right segment, our messaging was broad. And so the broad messaging was not resonating with the narrow segment that we needed to sell into. And therefore, the demand system didn't work. And what did I do? After 4 months of spinning my wheels on those things and getting forced on the MQL hamster wheel, I went out and talked to 30 customers in all those different segments. And what did I learn? That the major segment that had the largest total addressable and what we put on all of our investor decks didn't actually have a problem that we were solving. We had 4 customers in that segment, even though despite how big the market was, and we had 4 customers, all 4 of those customers were friends with our top investor. And we're over here having tons of marketing money being spent, tons of sales resources targeting these people because the market is so big and attractive. And we didn't even take step 1 to realize, oh, this segment, because of this thing, doesn't actually use our product. And all it took was going into 3 customers and asking how they use the product and seeing the product sit in the closet not being used for me to know that it wasn't a fit. And then you go to a different segment and you're like, wow. And then you ask them how they use the product and they show you. It gives you a very clear sense of this is starting to make sense to me now. And so I don't understand why people don't take that step, especially like under 5 million ARR.
I think that is such a key takeaway for everybody. Talk to your customers, and not the friends and family customers who came in there and believed in what you were doing right from the beginning and just did it because they wanted to be part of it and they wanted to support you. Talk to your customers and work through some diversity throughout that customer base to understand the actual things that are happening. And to Chris's point, go in and actually see how they're using it. Because if they're not really using it, then it's not making an impact. That's not what you intended. But for those who are using it, you might learn a lot. Why do you think why do we struggle? Why do we struggle with just asking those questions?
Because people don't set up the environment for people to tell you the truth. They set up the environment to help people tell you what you want to hear. And that's the difference. Like I had it written down here. You need to go into it objectively. You need to go into it and make people feel safe to tell you the truth. And you need to be able to kind of like, have a prerequisite in your statement, which is like, there's no right or wrong answer here. Like, if you tell me this thing sucks, that's a win for me because now I know, and now I can try and make it better for you. If you're not using it, it would be a good thing to know, because then you know what I mean? So whatever you need to do, I find that in person really is the lever here that a lot of, especially SaaS or remote sales, blah, 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 don't want to fill. Obviously, we have a situation here that makes that borderline impossible at the moment. So I understand, and you can get a lot of it done virtually, but I've always tended to do those inside of the office, because the periphery of the things that you see is super meaningful.
It's awesome. And to the point, just so that it's not lost in the discussion here, that piece about being objective. So when someone raises an objection or raises a challenge or corrects you on something or says this isn't right, don't fight back. Don't go in and try to turn the discussion around or explain to them why they're not using it right. Take the opportunity to gather the feedback and just conduct the research that's necessary to get the information. Because the one challenge that I see over and over again inside organizations is people inside the company focus on why customers buy and how customers buy and all of these things, but they forget they are not the customer. They're not buying things. They're not paying money. They're not purchasing this software. They might have used the software to solve a problem, and that's why they created it. There's a reason why your customers want you to be successful. Go in and ask questions, and then sit back and listen and ask deeper questions after they share information. Is that fair?
Yeah. And to be direct, what you just mentioned is the reason why I think this is better executed by marketing, because marketing can truly be separated from an outcome, unlike a sales rep or an account manager. And a lot of marketers, and me early in my career, actually was acting, when we were doing this process, was acting more like a salesperson, right? Like trying to overcome objections, where the whole point of this meeting is for you to learn. And so I think a marketer is the person who sits in a seat that is the closest to being able to remove that level of intent to try and convince or do that, or try and change someone's mind, and instead just try and learn. And so as soon as I started to really figure that out, which is probably like 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was career changing for sure.
The conversation has been absolutely awesome. The burning question I've got is, when you're out there, and I imagine about a bunch of other people are saying, hey, I'm excited about this. This all makes sense. Now I've either got to replace somebody that's inside the organization, or I've got to fill a gap that I've got inside the organization. Let's just say I've got to fill a gap inside the organization. What does the hiring process look like? How do you go through and make sure that you recruit the right person for the right time inside the organization? What questions should you ask? What indicators should you look for? So you kind of separate between, and this might be a cheat code for some people when they go through the interview process, but how do you separate between those who talk a bunch of fluff, but actually versus those who can actually understand the mechanics and can do the work? What are some things that come to mind for you?
Yeah. So I mentioned this a couple of times on LinkedIn, and I'm going to go into even more detail on it now. Like last year, I interviewed, it was more than 100. It could have been hundreds of demand marketers, from specialist individual contributor all the way to people that are a VP of demand generation inside of SaaS companies right now. Right. And so I have a very broad spectrum. And I would say, in terms of our hiring process and criteria, we have one of the most strict hiring criteria out of anyone for this role, because it's what we do and we understand it very deeply. The challenge for a lot of companies, whether it's a CRO or even like a CMO or a CEO, depending on the stage, that they don't understand the details at a high enough level to judge whether or not somebody's actually good, which leads you to leaning on whatever is currently commonly accepted based on what's happening in Salesforce or what you learned about a conference, which is why we see a ton of job postings for ABM specialist, which AKA means marketer, right? There's no difference between an ABM specialist and a person that knows actual marketing. Almost none. And so you lean toward whatever is commonly accepted or whatever the trends that you're hearing, which then often helps helps you, like leads you to making the wrong hiring decision. And then you find that out 6 months later, or you don't even know it at a level enough in 6 months to know it's not working. Right. And I know it's not working. And I know that 97% of people that go through an interview with me inside of Salesforce and different ad platforms and talking about content fail. And so it's a really interesting thing. Most likely, if you don't know how to judge it at a deep level, your odds are that you will make the wrong hire. The same thing kind of happens in, I would say, pretty consistent in a VP of sales leader role. I think that's very common with what's happening right now. And so when you think about that whole thing, what it leads you to think is either one, how do I understand this at a deeper level so that I can judge whether or not someone can do this? Or how do I make a network hire, or somebody, how do I get an introduction from somebody that really knows what they're doing, or how do I leverage somebody that I know knows what they're doing to help me do this? Like those are the things when you don't, and I would say a majority of the people are, they don't know how to judge it. And so you have to find someone that does. And that, I think that is the number one thing I get told a lot by people all the time. It's like, your stuff sounds great, but I can do this in house. And I'm like, have fun. I'll see you in about 24 months. Right. And so, because just I understand the level of talent inside the market at a very deep level right now. And I know what people are doing. And so
let's talk about that. Let's talk about the buy versus build discussion. So you can either buy a capability, work with people outside, or you can build the capability in-house. What's the thought process or decision-making criteria that an organization should go through as they start thinking about that buy versus build decision?
I think it comes down to, do you have a high level of confidence in your internal competencies to get the job done? Right. And so I think people listening to this will know whether they fall into that bucket, or, hey, like if I look objectively, I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to get this done. The way that I consider what we do is very much closely to what sales training was in 1990. We provide frameworks. We provide guidance to avoid mistakes. You know what I mean? We do a level of execution. And most importantly, we just provide a progressive strategy and confidence to executives about changing the metrics, which allows all the other things to happen. Until you change the metrics, none of the other things can happen that we do. And so that's what I look at this like. I think that companies in the future will continue to move, not only in demand gen, but in all other functions, to a place where there's centralized people that work in companies, that have people inside that are internal employees that are in roles that are absolutely required, whether it's for strategic, competitive advantage or core competencies, but most importantly, customer intimacy, right? So everything gets centered around customer intimacy on internal side, and external people provide frameworks and innovation.
I think that's a great distinction there. Distinguishing between, because what it does is it separates, hey, there are certain things that as an organization you deeply care about and can only know because of the work that you do and the inner workings that happen inside the organization. But there's some functional stuff that will help accelerate the building process that you can lean on expertise outside of the organization. And in many cases, due to the volume of folks that they're working with, they can actually provide a faster way to innovate in the space. Is that fair?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, I think that the ability for me to innovate for whether it's our customers or on our own is significantly higher than any person working in a role like mine inside of a company, right? If you're a director of demand, you have so many barriers to actual innovation, risk of failure, metrics that prevent you from doing it, lack of budget, like all these different reasons, got to hit your goals right this second, that make you risk averse, right? And I'm the opposite. And so being able to leverage people that have that freedom and then bring that into your company, I think is a smart move. The same thing would go, and I just want to make a different analogy for people so people understand. The same thing would go is if you're a manufacturing company, and when you manufacture, right now you're contract manufacturing, and you have developed a process where if you manufacture, you can do something different than all of your competitors that are currently contract manufacturing, whether it's develop at a price that is unmatchable because of your COGS and that ability to develop a specific feature that is not available in contract manufacturing for whatever reason, whatever, deliver faster than anyone else can, whatever the reason is. If it becomes a strategic advantage, that's the case when you start to move it in. And so I feel like a lot of companies, and don't get me wrong, like building it in-house, I think is where most people want to get to eventually. And I don't see it as an either or in a lot of cases. Like if you use a sales trainer, you still have a sales team. And if you don't use a sales trainer, you still have a sales team. They're probably just a little less productive, or I don't know what the success rate and that stuff on sales trainer are anymore. But if you look back in the day, like using a sales trainer to augment your sales team's ability to get the job done was a good idea. And we do absolutely none of that in marketing.
I think that's a key way to look at it. Like there's another quote that I'll absolutely butcher, but the Sun Tzu quote, to the extent of, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, then you have no reason to fear the outcome of 1,000 battles, or something to that effect. There are many times that we as organizations feel like we have to do all of these things internally rather than augment with capability that exists outside. And And I would challenge you. I'd challenge folks out there to say, hey, there's a benefit to working with others to help make things have things go faster. One, they can ask questions that will reveal blind spots and help shift perspective. But two, they have access to so many more data points than you have inside your organization, because rightly so, you should be an organization that is acutely focused on delivering whatever it is that you're delivering inside the marketplace. Mm-hmm. This conversation has been awesome.
Yeah, I want to get one more thing on that point, and then we can close that. I'm going to cut you off right there. We're at a point now where whether it's in marketing, sales, product, anything, speed is one of the most important things. If you don't recognize that, you are going to get passed by, right? If you don't recognize that from a marketing standpoint, you've already been passed by. From a sales standpoint, probably too. From a product standpoint, too, right? And so we need to start to prioritize speed, which starts to put pressure on bureaucratic processes, the CFO needing to approve everything over $5,000, not spending money in order to move faster, which is a better buy in a lot of cases than moving slower. And so I never really, I'm going to talk about that more frequently now because I'm really seeing it. Like, we make decisions and go, and the rapid acceleration of the things that which then continues to compound and build, like compounding interest, but in a different way that people struggle with because it's hard to quantify. It's hard to quantify the impact of speed. And so that's something that I'm going to talk more about.
I think it's an awesome thing to talk about. And maybe this might help thinking, or maybe it's already aligned with what you're thinking of, but there are different ways you look at the organization. You start to say, there's an aspect of the business where we need to focus on keeping the lights on, keeping things moving forward, stabilizing things so we continue to have the lifeblood happening so the organization stays intact. Mm-hmm. But then there's another segment that we can create inside the organization where innovation and creativity happens, that start looking beyond our headlights and start to think about where are we going and what's next, and can play a little bit looser and start mm-hmm. testing things. Yet so many organizations struggle with the idea of having everybody do everything. And we're just so overwhelmed that we have created a lack of specialization or direction inside the organization. Then we create risk in allowing people to say no to things. And mm-hmm. That challenge is something that all organizations struggle with, whether they're large organizations or small organizations. We can't make more time. We can absolutely be more effective in the way that we compartmentalize and start executing on things. So I can't wait to read more and see what you're talking about, hear what you're talking about.
It's why, like, companies that actually want to innovate put a specific set of people in a different place, because when you're inside, you get pulled into the things about keeping the lights on and you don't actually innovate. So people should think that's kind of a comp for using an external person, whether you're taking a group of your internal people and moving them out, or just leveraging a person that's already out. I thought that was an interesting point. Cool.
That's awesome. So we'll get you on. We'll get you on to talk more about that next time. This has been an awesome conversation. Where would you like to send people? Where can people find out more about what you're working on?
I think, honestly, like, the most popular place right now is the podcast. So if you want to check it out, it's called State of Demand Gen on Apple and Spotify and anywhere else podcasts are listened to. So I would encourage you to check it out, getting a ton of awesome feedback. And so, yeah, check it out there.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yep. Hey, and if you know of anybody who would learn something, find value in this conversation, please share it with them. Let Chris and I know via Twitter and LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing how you share it out in the marketplace. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?